My name is Richard Diehl. I'm here with Mr. Bill Werner, legendary builder for Harley-Davidson Racing. I can't even start to list your accomplishments and the people who you worked with, and the amount of races you've won, and championships you've won, and what it must have been like during that time when you basically learned by what worked and what didn't work, and you listened. And so you started, and you mentioned this to me before, you started at Harley in 1966?
1966, yeah.
And before that you were delivering propane.
Delivering propane, motor fuel for lift trucks, yeah.
And that was in Wisconsin?
Yeah.
And then you got a job at Harley by answering an ad in the paper?
Ad in the paper, wanted race mechanic, and I thought, I'd rather do that than anything.
So you knew Dick O'Brien?
I didn't know Dick O'Brien, I knew Ralph Burt. And Ralph Burt, when the ad was there, I asked him about the job. I said, hey, what about this job? And he said, oh, it's a terrible job. You wouldn't want to do that. I said, no, I actually would want to do that. I'd rather do that than anything. He said, oh, it's hot, it's dirty, and it's sweaty, and when you get done grinding cylinders, you'll polish rods, and I says, but, gradually maybe they'll let me build motors and stuff. He said, yeah, but it'll probably take a couple years. And I said, I don't care. So I said, well, if I apply for the job, will you recommend me to the race boss, Dick O'Brien? He says, yeah, I'll put your name down. And Dick O'Brien interviewed me and asked me, how knowledgeable I was. So I was just immersed in the whole automotive and mechanical world. By that time, I was even 15. It was my coming of age kind of thing. It just made me more relevant. In fact, my wife and I joke about this all the time when people say, well, why are you dating him? He's not that attractive. He's got pimples. He can fix cars. Everybody says he knows how to fix cars. And she had a car need fixing. So
you were in?
I was in. Yeah.
And then, so you ported for how long?
Oh, God, the first couple of years, that's all I did. And then they transitioned me into building components of the engine, then, sprint engines, and then KR engines, and then XR engines, and then I got to run the dyno and got more involved with all aspects of construction and of the engines. And by the time the 70s ran around, I was pretty much the resident expert on the aluminum XR.
In the race department?
In the race department.
So then when did you start working in the field?
In 74, they hired Gary Scott, and somehow the foreman of the shop, Walt Falk, he recommended me for the job. And Dick O'Brien said, okay, we're going to give you our number one guy, and he was Gary Scott, and I got to work with him for 2 years. Yeah.
And after that, it was Jay?
After that, it was Jay Springsteen.
Yeah. And he was night and day compared to Gary Scott.
Oh, personality-wise, yeah, just as different as different people could be. Gary was quiet and sullen and secretive, and Jay was open, exuberant, fun to be around. Just a whirlwind of fun. Everything he did was fun.
This is kind of I resurrected a hobby as I started retiring and kind of morphed into either bikes finding me or me finding bikes that are in need of restoration, some not. And I have this conversation with people all the time. Do you fully restore a bike? Do you resurrect it? Or do you just, if it's put away wet, just kind of dust it off and leave all the, we like the marring and the history on the bike.
It's people like you that keep the history of the sport and the history of the motorcycles alive. And there's a handful of guys like you that do that.
Well, it's important that everything we have, we want to either maintain or restore it to a particular point in time. And this was obviously the end of 72. I had different people say, oh, you should, put a disc brake front end, which was the next reiteration and things like that. But we have the Fontana on it and so forth. But even things like we had to repaint the frame, which was a blessing because then we kind of discovered all the other serialization numbers. But leaving all the bolts, we wanted all the patina in the rusty washers. You clean things off, but you put them back together that way because it maintains for me anyway, it maintains the feel of the bike and the history of Renzo's history and your history. Everyone has hands on these things, and there are marks and mars on places where things happen that you don't want to take away. When we first started doing this, you called me up and you said, "Hey, how do you want the motor?" I was like, "What do you mean, how do I want the motor?" And you said, "Well, some guys want it shiny and nice." And I said, "No." I said, "Don't make it shiny and nice. Make it the way it was." So, which you did. I mean, obviously, I don't think you know how many motors you've taken apart and put back together in your lifetime here, but it's wonderful. It's perfect. But yeah, this is an incredible piece, and I'm just so happy to have it. And when I got it, it was in a non-running condition, complete but non-running, and now to hear the thing come alive again, everything we have has got to run. And we've been going through this diligently to make sure that it is exactly as it was back in 1972.
I'm convinced because the trademark, I took the engine all apart, split the flywheels, and the flywheels are marked Renzo, and they got the balance factor on there. And I can see the Italian workmanship on this because the pushrod tubes are notorious for leaking after a while, and they went through the trouble of undercutting the pushrod exterior tubes and putting O-rings in it. It's got a Dancy ignition system, which is an Italian ignition system, not the Harley-Davidson Fairbanks Morris Magneto. I'm convinced this is the bike that Renzo raced over in Europe from my assembly process. There's no doubt in my mind this is Renzo's bike.
And we also found, interestingly enough, that we had to do a little repair on the frame. There was a crack on the weld, and in doing so, we went through a repainting process, and we discovered that the Aermacchi factory actually punched their own numbers in the 3 frames that went over there. Their own serialization process. We verified that with another bike that was known to be a Renzo bike through a historian by the name of Bill Milbourne. So I'm excited to have this thing. It's a piece of history, obviously, and it's very precious to me. And again, to have Bill rebuild it once again, it's amazing. We just started the thing up with the 36 millimeter Mikunis. Now we're going to try the smooth bores and see how this thing runs.
All right.
Ready? Mm-hmm.
Sounds great, too.
It sounds incredible. It sounds absolutely incredible.
Everybody, I heard of them coming down the racetrack all together. Every motorcycle has its own unique sound, and something about XR that the fans love. I've just got a personal love for it. It's and when you record it, and I don't know what the sketch is when you see sound recordings, what octaves and what all that means, but it's got a unique sound.
When they were running these things, especially down at Daytona where you got wide open throttle, and I'm sure the dirt. Well, again, not to talk about dirt track, but like you go to Daytona, and you'd hear a 352 stroke, and then you'd hear an XR 750. So I mean, it's night and day. I mean,
as a kid growing up when I was 15. And a lot of my friends were listening to different kinds of rock music and stuff. I had a recording of the Isle of Man. And I'd play that record over and over and over again. And here's Kunimitsu Takahashi coming down the street at the, this corner and this corner. And I just, oh my God, it was like, just put chills down my, back just to hear those sounds.
You did a wonderful job getting everything working. I know the wiring was a little...
Wiring was, I wasn't as familiar. I mean, the Dancy ignition system's off their 250 Road Racer, and they've just rotated the pickups instead of being a 180-degree twin. They adapted it real well.
Yeah, and it fits nice and works. So we know that was a Renzo piece.
It was a step up from the Fairbanks Morris Magneto. I wish we would have got more of those.
I mean, it's pretty amazing. It's pretty clean, and even things like the steering locks. I know you'd mentioned when certain things when you were looking at it, you're like, oh yeah, that was something they did over there. Right. Like I said, the serialization number of the frame, and then every time you guys built motors, there were build cards with the motors.
Uh-huh.
And then I guess the build card on this one is showing that you built for Renzo, and it was interesting to see that the I don't know what section of the crank, where there was the balancing weights. The flywheel had it Renzo,
stamped for Renzo, and then they had the balance factor on it and stuff. So yeah, it's I'm convinced it's.
Why would they put his name on the flywheel though? I mean, was it?
I think we did that for Rayburn and Lawwell, or
each guy had their own.
Some guys liked a little bit different balance factor than other because it vibrates in different areas and stuff. Being a single plane crank, it's without a counterbalancer. It's not if they vibrate; it's which range you want to vibrate in. And like anything else, guys had preferences.
Yeah.
And stuff,
okay. Interesting. And then this was I was surprised at how actually how smooth this thing ran. For the time we had it, and we were bleeping it and doing. I mean, it was.
They're unique engines. I mean, the evolution from what it was, from the cylinder basis up, especially was a KR or XLR or something like that. Other than the flywheel stroke and rod length and stuff, it's 50s technology that evolved all the way up into the competitively racing to the mid 2000s.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a unique piece of engineering that evolved over the years. It's part of Harley history. It's just they made that movie 50 years of the XR750 dedicated to the 50 years of this unique piece that was engineered by a handful of guys in the race shop, along with some external experts, the Jerry Branches and the C.R. Axtells and the people who did the fiberglass, the Wixom brothers and stuff. They're just, it was a unique piece.
The XRs first showed up at Daytona in '70.
Uh-huh. They were the cast iron XRs. They were the transition from the KRs to the XRs, and they were D-stroke Sportsters. And my job at the time was converting those engines, which were single carb at the time, to dual carb. So I was the guy. He said, "Okay, you convert these to dual carb." So I did all the welding on the cylinder heads, and it took me a year to make like 12 sets of cylinder heads. I had to convert a front head into 2 rear heads. So I had to plug the exhaust port on the left side, move it over to the right side, braze it all in, construct a new port over on the right side. So the front port had a exhaust port that came off the right side. The rear one came off the left side. And they both had dual carburetors like the XR750 aluminum wood had. And we used to have to pack them in powdered asbestos and use a gas fluxer to braze it all in there. And I'd go home covered in powdered asbestos. And to get them to not crack after we welded them, I have to dump them in 55-gallon drums of powdered asbestos to get them to cool over 2 days,
Wow.
so they wouldn't crack during the valve guide. It was just a
learning experience.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't know about asbestos back then, and yeah, maybe they did, but you did what you had to do.
Yeah.
Nobody else wanted it in the shop. Everybody else said, "Yeah, let the kid do it."
And then in '72 when the aluminum heads came out.
Yeah, '72. Yeah.
Okay. And then, do you remember anything about this particular bike back then?
Well, I know we had to make them for the Italians.
So was that an order that came down from Dick O'Brien or something? I mean, how did that come about?
Well, because we had a collaboration with Aramachi at the time. We were racing sprints, and they were interested in racing the 750s, so they came over. I got to meet one of the top mechanics, Ezio Mascarodi, who happened to be Renzo's mechanic. Developed a great friendship with him. He was teaching me more about some of the tricks of the sprint motor and the 250s, and he helped me with the 250 short trackers and whatnot. And I was teaching him about the XR750s. So seeing how he was Renzo's mechanic, he and I'd get together at night after races, and we'd just trade insights onto the things that he'd have to learn about the XR750, and just a great guy.
Yeah. And then so when Renzo raced Daytona, did they bring the bikes back over, or did he race? Because they built how many XRTTs?
Oh God, I don't know the number off the top of my head. I know he had a couple of them. The first prototypes were made by Ralph Burt at home.
Yeah, that's what he was saying.
Yeah, they were made at home. Then they brought them to the factory, and then they were, remanufactured to his specs.
Well, I got to thank you so much. This has been great.
I got to meet you.
I got to meet you too,
guys
man.
like you. They're so different than me. I mean, Richard and I talk about the way he does things, and we're total opposites.
I drive him crazy. But
I'm just kind of, he's a detail guy. I'm a detail guy about motor stuff and speed stuff. Not a cosmetic guy, not an appearance guy. I'm just a guy steeped in making them go that way. And if there's I used to get teased all the time about Scotty's bikes having shoddy paints. I'd paint it with a spray bomb and stuff like that. I'd say, oh, Parker's bikes, they look like crap, And I said, well, I cover them up with the checkered flag.
there you go.
And that was my fix. And they just said, don't be a smart ass, And I said, well, if I got 10 extra minutes, it's going into the motor and not into the paint job.
Well,
that's just me.
You're racing.
I'm just always forward.
Yeah. I get that. We had a lot of fun doing this together, and I hope we do more things with Renzo, and
I'm sure we will.
I hope so.
I'm sure we will. This is lifetime employment.
I love it. This is great. This is a lot of fun, and it really today is kind of like the culmination of a lot of things with this
bike.
To
hear it. You get to hear the sound.
You get to hear it running, and you get a sense of its breathing, and it's an amazing piece. It really is an amazing piece. So, yeah, we'll finish up with the carbs, and I know the stuff that drives you nuts. I'll spend hours on, like making sure the brackets are right for the fairing and things like that. You're like, just get the bloody things on there and forget about it. But once the fairings and everything's on it, it's a beautiful piece. It really is a beautiful piece.
Well, it'll be something that could be reserved for forever, your lifetime, and somebody else's.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We're just keeping him for a little bit.
Yeah, you're a caretaker.
We're just a caretaker. Yeah. All right, pal.
All right.
God bless you.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.